Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Medical Legal Partnership Town Hall on delivering telelegal services during COVID-19. My name is Kate Marple, and I'm the Director of Communications at the National Center for Medical Legal Partnership. We're so grateful to everybody for joining us today, especially given the times that we're living in. We know you're all incredibly busy, and it's just so great to see the MLP community gathering for these series of town halls to provide some information to each other and some best learnings, and also just to spend some time with community. So we have three medical legal partnerships who are going to be presenting today. And in just a moment, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Mallory Curran. But I wanted to make just a few technical notes first. So just so everyone knows, this town hall is being recorded, and we will be posting the video link up later today. So if you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, just hang tight. The video recording will be available. If you have questions for any of our panelists during the course of the town hall, please enter them into the chat box. We're expecting upwards of 250 people, so everyone, all attendees are muted, but we will get to your questions in the chat box. And then lastly, I just wanted to point you to a couple of other resources here on the next slide. So the National Center has been putting together some various resources to help medical legal partnerships during COVID-19. So if you go to our resource page on our website, you will see that the recordings of the other town halls on advanced care planning and MLP operations and eviction moratoriums are available, along with a tip sheet about 8 operational things all medical legal partnerships can do. And then finally, an ongoing digest of resources from other organizations around specific issues like immigration, housing, utilities, et cetera, that we think are particularly helpful for folks during this time. So those are all available on the resources tab of our website. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mallory Curran, who's going to be moderating today's panel.
Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just want to let you know a few of the questions that those of you, when you registered, if you put in some topics that you wanted to cover, this is a list of some of the questions that came up. This is obviously a huge topic, and we're not going to be able to cover everything today. So I just want to reiterate a couple of things that Kate had said about the resources that I think are particularly helpful. So here I am on the National Center's website. This is where you can find the materials that she was talking about. And I particularly want to highlight these 3 resources for doing remote legal work. And I'm just going to hop up here on the what's known as LSNTAP, the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project website, lsntap.org. We mentioned it on a previous webinar, and I just want to make sure that everybody knows about it. We got a lot of questions about like faxing and what types of phones to use and texting and all those kinds of things. And I just want to point out that they have a listserv that's enormously helpful and covers a lot of those topics. And then down here at the bottom, there's some featured videos. So in particular, we got some specific questions about digital scanning and digital signatures. So very handily, there is a webinar on that. So some of the questions that came in, we're not going to be able to cover, but this is a great resource to address a lot of the questions that were asked. Another question that came up frequently was connecting with people remotely, with potential clients remotely. So I also want to point out the best practices for providing legal aid and working remotely from our colleagues at the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project. And they have great resources in this document. And then they also sort of give a nice overview of working remotely, building trust and rapport with clients remotely, and so on. So if you haven't reviewed that document, I encourage you to do so. So thanks to our friends at the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project, and thanks to our friends at ASAP as well. Okay, and then Kate put together this slide for all of us who are on this call. Many of these names may be familiar to you, some of them may be new. I'm Mallory Curran. I'm trained as an attorney and now am a consultant working with MLPs across the country, which has been wonderful. And because Kate did such a nice job with this slide, I'm not actually going to read everybody's bios, but I just wanted to say a few words, which is that, you know, we asked these three teams from Los Angeles, Alaska, and Montana to be the ones to talk to you today because they each have a long history of using technology to communicate with partners as well as with patients and or have worked remotely with clients for many years. So their remote work did not begin with COVID-19, whereas I know for a lot of us on the call, it has just begun very recently. So even though they have a lot of experience, yes?
This is Kate. I'm sorry. I think that we're still on the first slide. I don't think they're changing for everyone.
I see. Okay, just one moment here. Let me make sure that I'm not paused. Sorry about that. I've been flipping around with slides, showing different things, and people couldn't see, so I apologize for that. Can you now see the next slide?
Yes, we're on the faculty slide now.
Okay, looks like a rookie mistake. How embarrassing. Well, hopefully everyone will forgive me for that. So again, these folks who you can now see, their wonderful faces, are going to be talking with us today. And again, they have a lot of experience that they bring to bear. I also want to say, even though they have all this wonderful experience, that's not to say that COVID-19 hasn't changed realities for them. And it's also not to say that they have everything perfectly figured out. All of us are struggling to some degree. So I don't want these folks to feel like they have to live up to some form of perfection because, as we all know, we're not living in a perfect world right now. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our LA team, which includes Dennis Shia, Eve Rubel, and Gerson Sorto.
Thank you, Mallory. Can you flip to the next slide? Thank you. So we really appreciate this opportunity to talk about our telecommuting telelegal services and the remote work that we've been doing before COVID and since then. And you're right. I think that we were in a really great position because we had already been doing remote legal services, but COVID-19 has changed everything, and it has been very challenging to say the least. So I just want to say for a minute that Medical Legal Community Partnership Los Angeles started a couple of years ago. It started as a program of whole person care here in Los Angeles, and whole person care provides services, a number of programs to the most vulnerable and high-risk populations in LA County. So when we were putting together this program, we realized that many of our participants, in fact, maybe even most of them, aren't going to the health clinics. So we started providing services at one health clinic, but we wanted a way to utilize the community health workers who are really the key to our program and bring the services out to where the people are. We didn't want to create another barrier. Although the community health workers really have as a goal to link their participants with primary care services, a lot of them never make it in. So we wanted to do this remotely. And we had initially thought about doing it through the telephone, but when we had our collaboration of legal partners, they suggested using a portal. And if you can go to the next slide. Thanks. So actually, if you can go to the next one. So as you can see, this is the model that we ended up using. We had the MLCPLA hub where everything was processed, but we had our referrals from our community health workers. So they were trained to use an online portal. And that worked really well for them because they all have Surface Pros that they carry around with them so that they could submit their referrals online, either at the time that they're talking to the participant or when they get back to their office later in the day. And then we had the referrals received directly by the providers at the R1 on-site clinic. All right, and I think that's about it for me. I'm going to turn it over to Gerson to talk about the next slide.
Thank you, Eve. So yeah, as Eve mentioned, you know, we were fortunate enough to have some tools already in place to really focus our remote work before we even were dealing with COVID. So the first tool we had was the online portal that we created through Legal Server. The idea of this portal is that it would allow us to have a mechanism to very easily receive referrals from community health workers and really anyone else within the DHS system that we were working with. And we receive referrals, we receive technical assistance requests, and it also provides us a platform from data collection. So we were working with 4 other legal services organizations, none of which worked with Legal Server. So one of the challenges was figuring out how do we collect this data in a way that's useful, in a way that's as efficient as possible. And if you can go to the next slide, you'll see this is one of the screenshots that our community health workers see when they go on to the system to provide us with referrals. So a lot of the information about them is already built in, and then they just tell us more about the patient's needs, their demographic information. They also tell us about consent, whether the patient consents to have their information shared with the partners and with DHS. And it's been a really useful tool that we've already integrated such that when we were looking to move to remote work, we didn't have to create a new workflow that would allow us to be in separate locations. We had this one tool that really served that purpose. Even though the tool itself was helpful, and as Eve mentioned, we came up with this proposal initially, one of the challenges was really how to encourage our community health workers to continue referring in the beginning. If we go into the next slide, you'll see some of the sort of back-end information that we capture. But when we started our community health worker portal, we weren't really getting that many referrals. But in the first month, we had 2 referrals, and I think we were all very stressed out about what are the barriers? How is it that we have this system and we've talked to community health workers, we've trained them, but still the numbers are not coming in. And us and our team of legal services organizations at the time, Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles, Mental Health Advocacy Services, and Pathetic Legal Services all did a really great job of outreach with the individual community health worker teams, of doing one-on-ones with them, participating in staff meetings and group check-ins. And even though the portal and the electronic referral mechanism was really valuable, ultimately that in-person support and that in-person relationship building was what allowed us to have our numbers grow. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see one of the quotes from our CHWs who utilizes the portal and really shows the focus that we had on our CHW teams. And a lot of them, one of the things that I love hearing is that they access a lot of electronic referral tools, but the portal is one of the easiest ones that they have available to them. And on my last slide in this section, you'll see a quick little snapshot of some of the legal barriers that we see. This is pre-COVID, but I think a lot of these issues are still prevalent now that we're dealing with patients that are impacted by COVID. And on the right, you'll see our progression of cases month by month. So, initially we got off to a little bit of a slow start, and that partly was intentional. We had a staggered rollout as we developed the systems, we troubleshooted, we trained, but now we are getting a consistent number of referrals. One of the things you'll see when I next talk to you will be some of the challenges we're having now related to COVID. And I'll hand it off to Dennis to share more about what's happening in LA related to COVID.
Great. So LA, as you guys are familiar with, is quite large, and in such, it has both sort of rural and urban components. And the stars on the map represent the actually 9 physical sites we had expanded to right before COVID hit. And we were in the process of growing, I think, using the online portal as well as physical sites to access those who were accessing healthcare. But with COVID hitting and our stay-at-home order, we had to move all of our attorneys off-site. And one of the biggest challenges, I think, from the MLP perspective is the whole move to telehealth, both because it changed the screening processes, but also because there have been clinically decreased volumes across our health system. Next slide, please. And I think one of the biggest questions we've had is how do you keep referrals coming when everybody's working in a new medium, especially for our health providers, many of which have never used video conferencing, much less done a phone visit until now. And really, they're juggling a lot of new technology, a lot of things in a very different format, and thinking through that. A couple of opportunities that we've taken advantage of is the Lifeline program, which is the federal program and the state program that provides cell phones to low-income individuals. We've actually worked with the vendors to be able to provide that to our patients with minimal barriers, and they're generally able to get these out on while the patient is there with them. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes. So that's one thing we've started rolling out across our different sites in the county, not just at our healthcare facilities, but also at our housing sites for individuals experiencing homelessness and treatment sites for different things such as substance use disorder, to really try to encourage and allow for access to different programs, including the medical legal partnership. And the other big thing we've sort of worked out, at least on the healthcare side, Gersa mentioned the consents in the portal, which are already built in, which is very helpful. But on the healthcare side, we've basically moved generally to doing what we've had to do for years when patients weren't available or their family members weren't available to come in, is doing verbal consents. And I know a lot of you had questions in terms of what we're doing. So I think for us on the healthcare side, the verbal consents have really become the standard for treatment and also for referral to the medical legal partnership. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Gerson.
And thanks, Dennis. So yeah, as Dennis mentioned, there was a fairly rapid shift to this remote work. I think it was the week of March 16th when we, we ended up moving all of our clinics to work remotely. And I think across our project, as Dennis showed on the map with all the stars, like our clinics are in very distinct geographic areas with very unique populations and cultures. And for us, attention throughout this entire project has been the goal of standardization, while really allowing enough flexibility for the individual clinics to be able to do what they need. And that also manifested itself here as we shifted to remote work. Not only, the needs of our individual clinics, but also our partners. We have partners who are very large, like our office and Legal Aid Foundation, other partners who are smaller, and sort of the logistics, the technology, all of that really had to come together in very short order in order to minimize the impact on our staff and on our patient population. I'm happy to say that, throughout this transition, it happened fairly quickly within, I think, a matter of a week. And there was no loss in service available to patients. What we ended up doing is moving to a telephonic model. And we were normally seeing patients Tuesdays and Thursdays, for example, at a clinic. Our attorneys then just became available by phone during that exact same time. And we try to keep things as sort of seamless as possible to staff initially, and I think that worked out well. The fact that we had, technology like our online portal, we have cloud-based case management systems, different messaging systems like Teams and others that we use have been really helpful for us as legal aid organizations and our staff to stay together, to stay connected. Leveraging the technology of our clinics when we participate in check-ins with them now, they're not in person, obviously, but we're using Skype or GoToMeeting or other opportunities to have them, allow us to have a physical presence as much as that's possible now. And there has been an impact on patient volume, as Dennis mentioned. And I was looking for a little infographic that would kind of show that. And I think the red and the green arrows are kind of where I feel right now. It's, our patient referral numbers have been on a downward trend. However, the number of cases per patient have been increasing. And for us, I think that makes sense, right? When we're seeing fewer patients, but those that are coming in are having more impact by COVID, whether it's housing, employment, healthcare issues, or concerns that they're having. Our goal, and we've been working, and we'll see on the next slide, is we've been working very hard to try to increase those numbers across the board. But for example, from February to March, we had a drop of about 19 cases and about 23 referrals from one month to the next. So on this slide, we see some of the efforts we've put together very quickly to try to, again, increase the number of referrals. First, we've developed a lot of materials related to COVID for our partners. We have this prescription to wellness pad, which we've already been using. However, we've adapted that now to include a section on COVID, and it might look like a regular prescription pad. However, it has, instead of an area for writing a prescription, it has different checkboxes for different legal barriers that patients might be facing. And we find that that's helpful for patients to have something tangible to take with them if they're an in-person visit, and also to help remind providers about some of the barriers that we can help with. We've created other flyers. We created a one-page informational resource for staff, some flyers to patients reminding them, hey, if you're having these problems, we can potentially help. We've started a webinar series with our legal partners. We had an initial introductory, general, like these are all like in 1 hour, cram in all the different issues related to COVID that your patients might be seeing. And now we're doing additional webinars that are really focused on particular areas, and they've been pretty well attended from across the DHS family. And then we've also increased referral pathways. So we've added additional phone and email options for referral. We've actually also expanded to 3 additional DHS clinical clusters that we were previously not working with. And our goal is, and I'm happy to say that now with these additional sites, we are now offering services to every single DHS patient across the county, which is great. It is challenging though, to have these initial rollouts, which really often needed a lot of face time for planning, for engagement, for outreach. Doing that by phone has been challenging. And next slide for Dennis.
And so I think looking ahead for us, I think none of us know what this is going to hold, but at least from the healthcare perspective, we're curious to see if this is going to change how the delivery system does business in the future in terms of moving more to televisits and things along those lines to both improve access to patients, but also given sort of the long tail of COVID. And I think for us, that really means thinking through and working with Gerson and team about how to leverage those strategies and really make sure MLP and legal issues are top of mind for providers who are doing business in a different way. And I think for funding, this is always a concern. Our MLP is funded through our Medicaid waiver and through the healthcare system. And with decreased tax revenues and sort of delays in the waiver process, we're curious to see where this goes. We're optimistic it'll stay, but I think healthcare itself may be seeing a contraction, which may affect MLPs as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mallory.
Great, thank you. So Kate, if you can let us know, I'm going to go back up to the screen with everybody's lovely photos here. And are there any questions that have come in over the chat?
Yeah, a couple of questions have come in, Mallory. The first one is about verbal authorization. It says in education cases, we need to have a hard authorization to provide us access to school records. Also, we need to do a limited rep agreement, and getting reps back from client is taking weeks or more. Does anybody have thoughts on this?
That's a great question, and I'm actually going to have us wait until maybe that Nicole can address that, and I know that Callie can from Montana. So that's a question that we can come back to. And I'm also, now that you're hopefully are actually seeing my screen instead of me thinking that you are, but you're not, want to sort of visually show you back in the resources from the National Center. I do encourage you to look at the remote legal work section. And here is what the LSNTAP website looks like. And I do encourage you to join their listserv. There's a lot of resources. And then there's also these webinars about digital signatures and digital scanning. I think that there are some legal services programs that are really moving towards digital signatures as much as possible. And I'll say lastly, this is the document from our colleagues at the Asylum Seeker Advocacy Project, where they talk about, sometimes they just have to have a hard signature that's not possible under the current rules to do otherwise, and talk about some of their policies and procedures for getting hard signatures. So to keep us on track, I'm actually going to have us go ahead and turn it over to Nicole. I know that more of these questions are going to come up, and all of our panelists are going to be able to address them. So let's have Nicole talk a little bit about what has happened in Alaska historically, as well as what is going on now in the post-COVID world.
Great. Thanks, Mallory, and it's great to be here. So I'm Nicole Nelson, and I'm the Executive Director of Alaska Legal Services, and we are Alaska's only statewide provider of civil legal aid, and we have been operating in Alaska for over 50 years. We have 12 just legal aid offices and also 6 medical legal partnerships that are we are operating in a network with our tribally operated healthcare facilities in Alaska. And again, the challenges in our state, which were obviously pre-existing COVID, we have an enormous state that is bigger than the next 3 largest states combined, California, Montana, and Texas. We have a very low population density. We have less than 700,000 people, and they're scattered across this vast expanse in very small communities, most of which aren't road connected. And an additional challenge that we sometimes face is that because we are proudly home to, we are the most Indigenous state in the Union. We have 18% of our population are Indigenous peoples. We have challenges related to being culturally appropriate and language barriers. So this is the world we've been operating in for 50 years. And you might think that given this, that we might, remote service delivery is kind of our thing. We've been doing it for a very long time. And so one might think that we effortlessly slid into this new world without a bump. Spoiler alert, you'd be wrong. COVID has affected us as well. And so I wanted to talk a little bit today about the challenges and lessons we've learned, a little bit about remote service delivery over the years, and also just wanted to say that while we don't have all the answers, as I have been telling my staff, I'm really confident in our ability as a community to learn through this about how we are going to be able to connect with the most marginalized people. This is what we've been doing as a legal aid community and as medical legal partnership community for many years, and I think we will continue to navigate our way through this. So just to start out, just a brief sort of description about our MLPs. Our network of MLPs are spun out and interwoven with our tribally operated healthcare facilities throughout our state. And for those of you who aren't super familiar with Alaska, we have one relatively large sized city, Anchorage, which is about 300,000 people. And then we have a number of hub communities that are not road connected to Anchorage for the most part. And those hub communities have about maybe 6,000 to 10,000 people in them. And each of those hub communities are surrounded by a number of smaller villages, between 22 or 56 smaller villages that can contain maybe 30 to 600 people. And none of those are connected to the hub communities as well. So you have to fly into them. So you would need to go from Anchorage, you need to fly to a hub community like Nome, and then there might be a village outside of Nome where people live too. So our tribally operated healthcare facilities have the biggest infrastructure within our state. They have the widest footprint, and it's built through a system of community health aides that most of those smaller villages all have a community health aide. But people are traveling into both hub communities and also into Anchorage to get their health care for the most part. We have embedded our MLP attorneys both in the hospitals in Anchorage, where people are coming in from very remote communities, and then also we have MLP attorneys that are embedded in the hub communities as well. So due to the pandemic, our healthcare partners again asked us to leave the facilities and start working from home in which they were operating. And also our state, in addition to stay-at-home orders and stay-put orders and a hunker-down order, we were also, there's been interstate travel bans and intrastate travel bans. So essentially, you need to quarantine for 14 days if you're moving from one community to the next. Also, the border with Canada is closed at this point. So this has limited our access. We had people, we had intentionally co-located our attorneys in the hub communities and in locations where people would be traveling in for healthcare so that we would have better access to them. And that access is limited. People are not now traveling for non-emergent healthcare needs. So a couple of things too about the way we do business at Alaska Legal Services. As I mentioned before, we've been doing remote service delivery for 50 years, and I think we do a pretty good job of it, or have historically. In the last year, we served clients from 204 different communities, and only a handful of those are road connected. 90% of the communities that we're referencing there were off the road system, and we oftentimes were used to representing clients for years on end without ever seeing them in person. And this has been made possible for a number of reasons. First off, most of our institutions, our state institutions, including our courts and administrative hearing judges and DPA, allow for telephonic and video appearances and the electronic exchange of documents, and are really good. And they've needed to do this just out of necessity. Because our court systems and state institutions don't have a physical presence in all of our remote communities. So to some extent, our way of operating didn't change that drastically. But one thing that really has changed is that we've traditionally relied upon, and our historical trends have shown us that, the way to serve people in remote communities, you can do it remotely, you can do it from a distance, but you have to occasionally show up and be present and establish some trust, and also remind people that you're there. And so consistently, even prior to COVID, if we had a vacancy in an office, people would stop coming from the remote communities. They just forget that you were there. So we would traditionally outreach during the summers, do village trips to touch base with our community navigators or whoever has the biggest presence in remote communities to remind people we're here, we're available to help, and would sort of rely on that to keep referrals up. At this point, we aren't able to do that. And another thing that we have traditionally relied upon in serving really marginalized clients is what we call sort of legal extenders or community navigators. We're really connecting with the problem solvers in the community, and they're able to bring in clients who might have difficulty accessing the technology they need or know that we're available. And again, under stay-at-home orders, stay-put orders, that's an additional challenge. People aren't mixing between households at this point, and so that presents additional challenges for our way of doing things. And I have to say, we haven't quite cracked the nut on that one yet. We still have a lot of learning and growing to do, but we are trying to figure out a way forward. One thing I would say right now as I look to the future of MLP and how we are going to best serve our communities during this time, I think that one of the most powerful things that we can be doing as legal aid lawyers is essentially the equivalent of developing herd immunity on legal issues, so that we are educating as much of the population as possible about what their rights and responsibilities are under the law, and in that way protecting the most vulnerable from breaches, from those we can't reach. And I want to give an example of that. In housing right now, we're seeing an uptick in people with housing questions. Our courts right now are not hearing eviction hearings, and our legislature has passed a law that prohibits evictions for non-payment of rent, like many communities. In addition to that, the CARES Act prohibits evictions from certain subsidized properties. But that change in law has not been widely communicated or understood. And so right now, landlords are still issuing eviction notices and pursuing self-help strategies, and tenants feel like they need to move out. So one thing we can do when a client's actually reach us is we can call the landlord and we can explain to them that they can't do that it's illegal at this time. But the other thing we can do is widely communicate that information to the public so that everyone understands and knows what the law requires and hope to avoid sort of self-help and avoid eviction notices being entered. And so towards that end, we've been doing Facebook Live, which Facebook is a really popular information network. Social media is really popular in our rural communities, particularly Facebook. So we're doing Facebook Live, Q&As, and other social media outreach, which is aimed at educating not just our clients, but the community helpers, so that we're developing sort of what we'd like to think of as herd immunity on legal issues, so people know what their rights and responsibilities are and are less likely to breach them. And while those things are sort of a short-term communication issue, I think it does go to this longer-term strategy that we have been working on, which for several years with our MLPs. We, in conjunction with our tribally operated healthcare systems, we are working with a tribal college, Alaska Pacific University, who is building, helping to train and educate a culturally appropriate community-based healthcare workforce to build into the health aid training curriculum ways of identifying and screening civil legal issues, unmet civil legal needs, helping resolve them where possible, and also disseminating information about how you might reach an MLP lawyer. So I think one of the ways we can continue to reach these far-flung communities when our ability to actually be there as lawyers is not available is, again, making sure that we are sort of building into the system a way of educating our partners and cross-training healthcare workers about what it is we do and how the legal system can help improve health outcomes. So I'll leave it at that.
Great, Nicole, thank you so much. One question that came in, I'm actually going to pop back to LA for a second. There's been a request to see if the LA team would be willing to share their referral flyer, their one-page resource documents, and their prescription wellness pass.
Definitely.
Okay, great. And then a question or a comment about something that Nicole said, and then a quick question actually back to the LA team again. But Nicole, I wanted to ask if you, you know, one of the lessons that we've learned, I think, from a lot of people who have done remote work for a long time is sort of applying an MLP concept, which is meeting people where they are. So is that sort of how you came to the determination to do Facebook Live things? I've heard of other programs really relying on WhatsApp and other things that maybe are not considered very traditional methods for delivering services, but you've done a cost-benefit analysis and made the decision to go in that direction.
Yeah, and I think that we are trying to use the communication avenues that are going to be most effective at reaching the populations that we are there to serve. And so, yes, I mean, I think we need to meet people where they're at, and we also need to make sure that we're top of the mind and being present. And so we look to whatever means are available within our really remote communities.
Great, thank you. And then a quick question for LA before we move on to our Montana team. A question that came in was just how busy a lot of our healthcare partners are right now, and how were you able to get so many people to attend the training that you put on?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of really positive outreach done at many levels. So Eve, Dennis, and Anna Gorman, our DHS Central leadership liaisons or partners, really worked with directors and other folks within DHS. Our individual legal partners worked with their assigned clinic partners. So really the information was coming from multiple directions. And I think the content itself was informative and accessible to people, that they kept coming back for the second one, and we're hoping for the third one that'll be scheduled next week.
Great,
I think to add to that, for Ella, I think from the healthcare perspective, it's been interesting. I think New York has been getting absolutely destroyed in terms of their ED and inpatient settings, but most other healthcare settings are in this weird place where it's high anxiety, but the volumes are actually lower. So in some strange senses, people do have some time, even though the anxiety is high. And I think with the correct messaging, we're able to leverage that availability.
Okay. Thank you. And the Southeast region of the U.S., including South Carolina and Florida, we had a call last week, and we got a similar message from outpatient clinicians, both on the health and the behavioral health side. So I saw Olivia nodding her head in agreement on some of the things that Dennis was saying. So we'll turn it over to our Montana team first, Olivia Riuta from the Montana Primary Care Association, and then her colleague, Callie Dale Ramos from the Montana Legal Services Association.
Great, thanks, Mallory. So I'm Olivia Riuta. My title is Outreach, Engagement, and Population Health. I just keep getting more jobs, and we just keep sticking them on the end. I'm with the Montana Primary Care Association. If you're on the call and thinking, I don't know who my primary care association is, I would say you should do some Googling. The Primary Care Association works with all of the federally qualified community health centers in your state. In Montana, we also have 4 out of the 5 urban Indian health centers are our members as well at the PCA, and we see over a tenth of all the folks in the state of Montana. The PCA has been part of our medical legal partnership from the beginning. And so, which is helpful. I think in a time of pandemic, relationships really matter. And what we have seen is that the relationships that we've built with our partners at Montana Legal Services and with our health centers have really paid off. So the question I'm going to address is a little bit about how we're getting information out to our partners. So one of the ways that we've been working together at the Primary Care Association, we facilitate Cover Montana. It's an outreach and enrollment coalition that started with the ACA. These are the folks at community health centers and hospitals and other primary care settings who do Medicaid enrollments. They'll help you with housing. They will give you a referral to the food bank. In the HRSA world, we call those enabling services. And so all health centers are required to do enabling services. And so we facilitate a group of these folks and have for a long time. And so what we have been doing naturally through Cover Montana is responding to all of the changes to programs and services that these folks need to know about because their patients have greater and different needs. And so we have been naturally responding, right? Medicaid and housing, SNAP. And then what we have done is really bring in Cali and Montana Legal Services to help provide information. You know, I called Cali and said, we need to talk about the changes to UI. Can you do that? And Cali kindly said yes 24 hours before our webinar. And so what we're doing is kind of using this existing structure, bringing in MLSA's expertise into that group and educating everybody at the same time. This group includes our Montana Health Justice Partnership health centers. It also includes other health centers and other healthcare providers and direct service providers in the state. So we're educating everybody at the same time, frankly, whether they're going to come in through the MLP door into Montana Legal Services or they're going to come in through the front door, the kind of regular referral structure. And I would say the other thing about that is as we're thinking about the kind of long-term commitment to meeting our patients where they're at, so that they can quote unquote recover. I think we're thinking a lot about how the MLP and how Montana Legal Services is going to be a really important partner in that, because I think that the demand for those services and the place where folks find themselves where they might need that legal advice is only going to grow the further we get into this pandemic. I also wanted to say something about telehealth. I think it's totally true. What we saw initially in the pandemic is we essentially had we kind of cleared out our health centers so that we were able to respond to the surge. And I think that what we saw is a lot of health centers are seeing way less patients. So if you're thinking I shouldn't bother my health partners, they're very busy in some ways. And at the same time, they have a lot of time and capacity in other ways. So give them a call. And the other thing is I would say is, we've been talking about and doing telehealth to some degree for a really long time, but health centers certainly have jumped into telehealth with 2 feet. All of the regs around telehealth have been relaxed and shifted and essentially allow for payment in different ways than we've seen before. And so, we're doing teledentistry, which, is fascinating, the notion of teledentistry in and of itself. And so I think if you aren't an MLP program that has this structure and this approach, know that your medical friends are jumping into this telestructure, which for us is primarily phone. It's not video because of the complexities of adding that video for folks. But I would say if you're thinking about this switch, this is what is happening in healthcare. It's very normal. They're doing intakes, they're doing social needs screening, they're doing everything tele, if you will. And so it's kind of in line in the way that we are working to kind of normalize this new way to deliver services within healthcare.
Yeah, I'll just kind of jump in and I'm just kind of echo both what came out of LA and Alaska. But again, I'm Callie Dale Ramos. I'm the attorney for the MLP here in Montana. And pretty similar to Alaska, Montana has always done remote services because we're a big rural state that Montana Legal Services only has 3 offices in the state in kind of bigger cities in Billings, Helena, Missoula, but most of the population that we serve is literally hundreds and hundreds of miles away from any of those hubs. So why Montana started using the MLP is we found that it's a better way to provide the remote services that we were already providing, because we have those community contacts and have those networks that we can use, of having the social workers, the care coordinators, the providers, the behavioral health people that have that trust and have those connections to the client that can really bring them in and provide a lot better legal services for that client by using those partners. So pretty similar, it sounds like, to LA. We have normal operating procedure outside of COVID. We have a screening tool that we use to identify legal needs when a patient comes into their healthcare center. And then we have 2 releases that they sign, a HIPAA release so that the healthcare center can send it to us. And then we actually have the client sign that release, allowing us to communicate back to the healthcare center when they're there with the healthcare partner. What's been happening now is we're still receiving those referrals. So once the screening tool and all of the releases are signed, those get faxed to us through the electronic medical records, which Mallory has been helping us do a TIG grant, a technology and innovation grant, to kind of make that all be a little smoother. But so we've been using the resources that we've already developed. We had already talked about, can we get an oral okay for the releases in the short term, because to try and limit the paper use, so then people didn't have to screen and upload those. So we had already had a lot of those conversations thanks to the TIG grant, which we're now implementing. So we're still getting a lot of referrals from those outreach and enrollment coordinators who are still talking to people about their public benefits. Obviously, we've seen public benefits increase a lot of questions about SNAP, Medicaid, unemployment eligibility. We're still seeing a lot of behavioral health referrals, I think because that the telehealth world was a little bit further along in behavioral health than maybe dentistry, which is amazing, and medical. So we're still seeing a lot of behavioral health, and then some of just like new patients coming in and getting, so people are still doing all of that screening that we've already developed. It just is all on the phone, and then getting oral okays for both HIPAA and for the other release, so that we can continue to see those patients and they're not waiting or not having to come in to expose themselves to the healthcare centers. So because so much of that is operating kind of business as usual, for the start of the pandemic, almost half of all of the referrals that Montana Legal Services received at all were still coming in through the MLP, because our system was created to work remotely. We've seen a dip, which I think most people have now, but we continue to get referrals through the program because we had kind of done this previous work in order to do to make it work remotely, which again is just mainly what we've been doing because of geography and our population. And then I was just going to say that we also, through Legal Server, have the ability to like text out and email out those ROIs and retainers and all of that thing to get an electronic signature. So that's what we've been using. And but again, those are kind of systems that we had in place already, but it's a really effective way that we found to communicate with our clients who most of the time do have phone and can fill those out. I'm sure that we're missing people because we usually do rely on people who have homeless or do not have access to a phone to come into the healthcare centers to do those appointments in the healthcare centers, and that is limited, and it kind of is depending on person to person. But yeah, just to kind of quickly, we've certainly been relying on the partnerships that we'd already developed, mainly Olivia and kind of this larger community health network, to do all of our stuff, kind of our normal legal work, but also communicating with clients and trying to get information out there. And then we've also been doing, it seems like pretty similar to LA, a push to all healthcare centers all across the state to help us identify those issues of housing and public benefits. So we're getting the word out. If people are looking for resources, please refer to Montana Legal Services, because everybody there, it's confusing times, it's stressful, and people want information, and we want to be providing accurate, helpful information. So we've been using our partnerships really a lot on Montana Primary Care Association to help us distribute that information to everybody. So those are kind of my main 3 points, which is we're doing what what everybody else is doing. Yeah, so.
Great, thank you. And we've had a request come in, Montana, for you to share your screening tool, if you're willing to do that. Okay, great. And then I wanted to go actually back over to Nicole Nelson. I saw you nodding your head when Olivia was talking about phone over video, and we actually had some questions come in about video, and I just wanted to get your take on your experience. Do you rely heavily on video? Do you do more just plain old phone? What do your teams tend to do?
Yeah, so it's a combination. So again, a lot of our very remote communities, broadband is very limited. So it's difficult to, not all of our clients are going to have the bandwidth or for video. So, you know, we kind of go with whatever is possible at that time. So sometimes the phone works just as well as getting the video piece of it. Most of our very remote communities, their connection to broadband internet is going to come through the community health centers or from at the schools. Schools are closed at this point, and so access is more limited than it has been in the past. So again, I think that it is possible to do things over the phone, getting verbal consents, and then also, you know, following up if you need to mail in the document sometime after that. But as long as we have, you know, we can make up for that, and if somebody doesn't have access to that immediately, if we can get a verbal consent over the phone. But we are also able to do video. So video is where people have capacity. That is an option. And our court system right now is allowing things. We're getting lots of questions about, you know, decision-making documents, advanced directives, and also people wills are really, there's a high need for that at this point. And so our legislature passed a law that allowed for video notarizing. And so where we're able to take advantage of that and people have the capacity to move forward with that, we are able to help them by, you know, videoing the two witnesses, video conferencing in two witnesses, and a notary in that capacity to make a valid will. We're also giving out information about what to do if you a handwritten will in the, you know, in case you need to make that happen, but you also don't have the capacity to bring in, you know, the normal requirements that you would have for formality relating to executing a will.
Thank you, Nicole. And when you do video, are you using Zoom? Are you using FaceTime? Are you using other apps? What do you use?
Yeah, so we're not using Zoom, and we're not using, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what the other,
FaceTime.
FaceTime, no. We're not using those capacities. We use Google Hangouts. And so that's the technology that we have been able to use, but that's generally how we're online and operating.
Great. Okay. And then another question that had come in earlier was about, for the LA team, and this will be our last question, I think, how the online portal is maintained. So sorry, I have this question right here. And I wasn't sure if the question was, how is it being maintained, or who maintains and provides technical assistance for the portal? So I wasn't sure if the question was, who is actually providing the technical assistance? And Gerson can speak to this, but the technical assistance is provided in the same way that a case is. So it's not that the information itself is available on the portal. For the back-end technology side, it's actually me. I work with Neighborhood Legal Services of LA to maintain that online portal as part of Legal Server. So if you are on Legal Server, then whoever your Legal Server administrator is can do that, or you can bring in somebody from the outside to do it if you don't have the capacity. And Gerson, I'm not sure if you had anything that you wanted to add to that.
No, I think that sums it up. Yeah.
Okay.
Other than yes, Mallory has been very instrumental in developing and maintaining the portal, and we've had lots of opportunities to tweak it. And now I think we have 3 portals running because we're running multiple sites, and each site has their own little version of it. But I think it has, the Legal Server as a platform has allowed us some flexibility. I think with Mallory's creative thinking about utilizing it, in adapting it to what our individual sites need. So that's been very helpful.
And then Nicole, did you want to add anything to that? Ways that you've maintained any technology that you use with your clients?
I guess I'm not understanding the question. So I'm sorry. The way that we
yeah, so when you're using PICA or if you're using other types of technology to either run your remote practice or to communicate directly with clients, do you have kind of like a line item in your budget for somebody who helps you maintain that? Who's sort of in charge of technology for your organization?
Sure. So we do have an administrative director and a tech person, and then also we contract. We use PICA as our case management system, and so we contract with somebody who's outside of our organization to maintain the backup on that end.
Great, thank you. So I know there's a couple of more technical questions that have come in. We're running out of time, so we're not going to be able to address those today. I'm going to refer you back to the Legal Services National Technology Assistance Project. It has a lot of resources related to those questions. I do encourage you to look at those. And I know that we're going to have some ongoing conversations as an MLP community. I took some notes as our wonderful panelists were talking, and not in any particular order. I'm just going to share some of, I think, the themes that we heard. One is that telehealth and telelegal work does not need to mean video, that a lot of this work is happening over the phone, that it's very important to leverage existing relationships. It's much easier to advance what you're trying to do with people who already know and trust each other. We've heard that our healthcare partners may be more able to engage than maybe we expected they would be able to do at the beginning of all this in some of our earlier webinars. So not to assume that they can't engage with you right now, particularly on the outpatient side. A lot of people talked about meeting patients where they are, something that we've done in MLP for a long time, but we can translate that into the virtual world too. So thinking about things like Facebook Live, WhatsApp, other things that you might not have done in the past. I would say re-explore people's willingness to do verbal consent. There's some places that have been really resistant to that, and this may be a moment where they're more open to doing it than they have been in the past. Also, I've heard both today and from our Southeast U.S. regional call a real hunger for curated resources and sort of like one-pagers. So like, where is my stimulus check? What if I don't file taxes? Can I get a stimulus check? I know there's 12 places I could go maybe to find that answer, but MLP, I just want you to tell me the answer and in a way that I can communicate with my clients. And then also the last thing that I have as a theme that came up today is that MLP is really going to be central, or is currently central to prevention. So as Nicole was talking about with sort of herd protection and herd immunity, thinking about the ways that we can leverage our resources and our relationships. And also MLP is going to be really central to legal recovery in all of our communities. So we're right up at the top of the hour. I want to say thank you again for our teams from LA, Alaska, and Montana for being on here today. I also want to thank everybody on the call for the work that you're doing. I know it's a stressful time. We're all doing things in very new ways. A lot of people are thinking really creatively. Thank you so much for the work that we're doing. Thank you for the National Center for giving us this platform to connect. And we'll look forward to seeing many of you on future webinars. So please stay healthy and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.